On my wife's 60th birthday, she said, "I invited my ex-husband to the party. He's important in my life, and if you love me, you'd understand." I replied, "Of course I understand, dear." Then I called his wife and made an invitation. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I'm Daniel, and at 62 years old, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought I understood my wife Rose, believed in the 15 years we'd built together, trusted in the quiet comfort of our marriage. That was before her 60th birthday party changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in October when Rose dropped the bomb that would shatter my world. I was in the kitchen making her favorite coffee. 2 sugars, splash of cream, just the way she'd liked it since our first date. The morning light streamed through our yellow curtains, and everything felt normal, safe, predictable. "Daniel," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over the years. Not angry, not sad, just matter of fact in a way that always made my stomach tighten. "I need to tell you something about the party." I set down the coffee mug, the ceramic making a soft clink against the granite countertop. "What about it, honey?" Rose was sitting at our breakfast table, still in her lavender robe, her graying hair pulled back in the loose bun she wore every morning. She wasn't looking at me. Instead, she was staring out the window at our neighbor's maple tree, its leaves just beginning to turn red. "I've invited Stephen." The words hit me like ice water. Stephen, her ex-husband. The man she'd been married to for 12 years before she met me. The man whose name occasionally slipped into our conversations in ways that always left me feeling somehow inadequate. "Stephen?" I repeated, hoping I'd misheard. "Your ex-husband, Stephen?" She finally looked at me then, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not guilt, not apology, something that looked almost like defiance. "Yes, Daniel. Stephen will be at my birthday party." I stood there holding that coffee mug, watching my wife of 15 years tell me she'd invited her ex-husband to what was supposed to be our celebration. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too bright, too normal for what was happening. "Rose, I don't understand. Why would you invite him without talking to me first?" She sighed, the kind of sigh people make when they're explaining something obvious to someone slow. "Because he's important to me, Daniel. He's been part of my life for a long time, and he always will be." Important to her. The words echoed in my head as I tried to process what she was telling me. In 15 years of marriage, I'd met Stephen exactly twice, both times briefly, both times uncomfortably. Rose had always insisted their divorce was amicable, that they'd simply grown apart. She'd never mentioned that he was still important to her. "But Rose, this is your 60th birthday. It's supposed to be about us, about our friends, our life together." She stood up then, retying her robe with sharp, efficient movements. "If you really love me, Daniel, you'd understand that some relationships transcend simple categories. Stephen and I share a history that goes deeper than our divorce. He should be there to celebrate this milestone with me." The accusation hung in the air between us. If I really loved her, as if my 15 years of devotion, of putting her needs first, of building a life around making her happy, somehow didn't count because I wasn't comfortable with her ex-husband attending her birthday party. "I do love you, Rose. That's exactly why this hurts." She shook her head, and I saw something I'd never seen before, a flash of impatience, maybe even contempt. "It hurts because you're being possessive. Mature love means accepting that your partner has other meaningful relationships. Il a mature love." She was lecturing me about mature love while inviting her ex-husband to a party she'd planned without consulting me. I felt something crack inside my chest, a slow, spreading ache that started near my heart and radiated outward. "When did you invite him?" "Last week." "Last week." While I'd been helping her plan the menu, while we'd been discussing which relatives to invite, while I'd been arranging to take time off work to help with preparations, she'd already invited Stephen. The deception felt almost worse than the invitation itself. "And when were you planning to tell me?" She shrugged, gathering her coffee mug and heading toward the sink. "I'm telling you now." The casual dismissal in her voice made my hands shake slightly. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't even really a notification. This was Rose informing me of a decision she'd already made, expecting me to accept it without question. "Rose, please, can we at least talk about this? Can you help me understand why this is so important to you?" She turned back to me, and for a moment I thought I saw something soften in her expression. But then she spoke, and I realized I'd been wrong. "Daniel, Stephen was my husband for 12 years. 12 years. We built a life together, we shared dreams, we went through things you could never understand. Just because we divorced doesn't mean all of that disappears. 12 years. She said it like it was a badge of honor, like it somehow outweighed our 15 years together. Like the length of her first marriage gave it more significance than our current one. "What about us, Rose? What about the 15 years we've built together?" "That's different," she said, and the way she said it made my blood run cold. "You and I, we have comfort, we have compatibility, but Stephen..." She paused and I saw her face change, soften in a way it rarely did when she looked at me. "Stephen and I have history. History. Not love, not partnership, not the life we'd built together. History. As if our marriage was just a pleasant intermission between the real chapters of her life." I set down the coffee mug with more force than I intended, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. "I see. Do you? Do you really see, Daniel? Because if you did, you wouldn't be making this about you, making this about me." My wife had invited her ex-husband to her birthday party without telling me, and somehow I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one making it about me. I looked at Rose standing there in her lavender robe, her graying hair catching the morning light, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never seen this coldness in her eyes, never heard this dismissiveness in her voice. Or maybe I had, and I'd just chosen not to see it. "Of course I understand, darling," I heard myself say, the words coming out calm and controlled. "You're absolutely right. If I truly loved you, I would understand." She smiled then, a small, satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. "I knew you'd come around. Stephen is really looking forward to seeing you again." Looking forward to seeing me again. As if this was a social reunion instead of my wife's birthday party. As if I should be excited about the prospect of celebrating my wife with the man she'd apparently never stopped loving. I nodded, even managed to smile back. "Well then, I suppose I should make sure everything is perfect for your special day." But as I watched Rose walk out of the kitchen, humming softly to herself, I was already reaching for my phone. If Rose thought this party was going to go exactly as she'd planned, she was about to discover just how wrong she could be. I'm Daniel, and at 62 years old, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought I understood my wife Rose, believed in the 15 years we'd built together, trusted in the quiet comfort of our marriage. That was before her 60th birthday party changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in October when Rose dropped the bomb that would shatter my world. I was in the kitchen making her favorite coffee, 2 sugars, splash of cream, just the way she'd liked it since our first date. The morning light streamed through our yellow curtains and everything felt normal, safe, predictable. "Daniel," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over the years. Not angry, not sad, just matter of fact in a way that always made my stomach tighten. "I need to tell you something about the party." I set down the coffee mug, the ceramic making a soft clink against the granite countertop. "What about it, honey?" Rose was sitting at our breakfast table, still in her lavender robe, her graying hair pulled back in the loose bun she wore every morning. She wasn't looking at me. Instead, she was staring out the window at our neighbor's maple tree, its leaves just beginning to turn red. "I've invited Stephen." The words hit me like ice water. Stephen, her ex-husband, the man she'd been married to for 12 years before she met me. The man whose name occasionally slipped into our conversations in ways that always left me feeling somehow inadequate. "Stephen?" I repeated, hoping I'd misheard. "Your ex-husband, Stephen?" She finally looked at me then, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not guilt, not apology. Something that looked almost like defiance. "Yes, Daniel. Stephen will be at my birthday party." I stood there holding that coffee mug, watching my wife of 15 years tell me she'd invited her ex-husband to what was supposed to be our celebration. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too bright, too normal for what was happening. "Rose, I don't understand. Why would you invite him without talking to me first?" She sighed, the kind of sigh people make when they're explaining something obvious to someone slow. "Because he's important to me, Daniel. He's been part of my life for a long time, and he always will be." Important to her. The words echoed in my head as I tried to process what she was telling me. In 15 years of marriage, I'd met Stephen exactly twice, both times briefly, both times uncomfortably. Rose had always insisted their divorce was amicable, that they'd simply grown apart. She'd never mentioned that he was still important to her. "But Rose, this is your 60th birthday. It's supposed to be about us, about our friends, our life together." She stood up then, retying her robe with sharp, efficient movements. "If you really loved me, Daniel, you'd understand that some relationships transcend simple categories. Stephen and I share a history that goes deeper than our divorce. He should be there to celebrate this milestone with me." The accusation hung in the air between us. If I really loved her, as if my 15 years of devotion, of putting her needs first, of building a life around making her happy, somehow didn't count, because I wasn't comfortable with her ex-husband attending her birthday party. "I do love you, Rose. That's exactly why this hurts." She shook her head, and I saw something I'd never seen before, a flash of impatience, maybe even contempt. "It hurts because you're being possessive. Mature love means accepting that your partner has other meaningful relationships." Or mature love. She was lecturing me about mature love while inviting her ex-husband to a party she'd planned without consulting me. I felt something crack inside my chest, a slow, spreading ache that started near my heart and radiated outward. "When did you invite him?" Last week. While I'd been helping her plan the menu, while we'd been discussing which relatives to invite, while I'd been arranging to take time off work to help with preparations, she'd already invited Stephen. The deception felt almost worse than the invitation itself. "And when were you planning to tell me?" She shrugged, gathering her coffee mug and heading toward the sink. "I'm telling you now." The casual dismissal in her voice made my hands shake slightly. This wasn't a discussion, this wasn't even really a notification. This was Rose informing me of a decision she'd already made, expecting me to accept it without question. "Rose, please, can we at least talk about this? Can you help me understand why this is so important to you?" She turned back to me, and for a moment I thought I saw something soften in her expression. But then she spoke, and I realized I'd been wrong. "Daniel, Stephen was my husband for 12 years. 12 years. We built a life together. We shared dreams. We went through things you could never understand. Just because we divorced doesn't mean all of that disappears. 12 years. She said it like it was a badge of honor, like it somehow outweighed our 15 years together, like the length of her first marriage gave it more significance than our current one. "What about us, Rose? What about the 15 years we've built together?" "That's different," she said, and the way she said it made my blood run cold. "You and I, we have comfort, we have compatibility. But Stephen," she paused, and I saw her face change, soften, in a way it rarely did when she looked at me. "Stephen and I have history. History. Not love, not partnership, not the life we'd built together. History. As if our marriage was just a pleasant intermission between the real chapters of her life." I set down the coffee mug with more force than I intended, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. "I see." "Do you? Do you really see, Daniel? Because if you did, you wouldn't be making this about you. Making this about me." My wife had invited her ex-husband to her birthday party without telling me, and somehow I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one making it about me. I looked at Rose standing there in her lavender robe, her graying hair catching the morning light, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never seen this coldness in her eyes, never heard this dismissiveness in her voice. Or maybe I had, and I'd just chosen not to see it. "Of course I understand, darling," I heard myself say, the words coming out calm and controlled. You're absolutely right. If I truly loved you, I would understand." She smiled then, a small, satisfied smile that made my stomach turn. "I knew you'd come around. Stephen is really looking forward to seeing you again." Looking forward to seeing me again. As if this was a social reunion instead of my wife's birthday party. As if I should be excited about the prospect of celebrating my wife with the man she'd apparently never stopped loving. I nodded, even managed to smile back. "Well then, I suppose I should make sure everything is perfect for your special day." But as I watched Rose walk out of the kitchen, humming softly to herself, I was already reaching for my phone. If Rose thought this party was going to go exactly as she'd planned, she was about to discover just how wrong she could be. The rest of that Tuesday passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Rose went about her day as if nothing had changed, humming while she folded laundry, chatting cheerfully about party decorations over dinner. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd said Stephen's name, the softness that had crept into her voice, the light that had flickered in her eyes. That night, after Rose had gone to bed, I found myself sitting in my study staring at a photo on my desk. It was from our wedding day 15 years ago, Rose in her cream-colored dress, me in my navy suit, both of us smiling at the camera outside the courthouse. We'd chosen a small ceremony, just close family and friends. Rose had said she didn't want anything elaborate because her first wedding had been too much fuss for something that didn't last. Now I wondered if that was really the reason, or if she'd simply been protecting herself from investing too much hope in our marriage. I opened my laptop and found myself doing something I'd never done before, searching for information about Stephen. It felt wrong, invasive, but I needed to understand what I was dealing with. What I found made my chest tighten with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Stephen Mitchell, age 64, currently married to Margaret Mitchell for the past 8 years. He worked as a financial advisor, lived in a house 20 minutes from ours, and according to his social media profiles, led what appeared to be a perfectly normal, happy life with his current wife. But it was what I found next that made my hands shake as I scrolled through the search results. A local newspaper article from 3 years ago about a charity fundraiser. There, in a photo of attendees, were Rose and Stephen standing together, smiling, looking comfortable and familiar. The caption read, "Local residents Stephen Mitchell and Rose Henderson enjoy the evening's festivities. Rose Henderson." She'd used her maiden name, not mine. And this was 3 years ago, long into our marriage, at an event I'd never heard her mention. My heart was pounding as I searched through Rose's social media accounts, looking for clues I'd apparently missed. I found them. Comments on Stephen's posts that were just a little too friendly, too familiar. "I hope you're doing well. Thinking of you today. Remember when we used to..." The timestamps made my stomach turn. These weren't occasional pleasantries between ex-spouses who'd remained friendly. These were regular ongoing communications spanning years of our marriage. I dug deeper, my hands trembling as I accessed our shared phone records online. What I found there destroyed any remaining hope that I was overreacting. Calls to Stephen's number going back 2 years. Short calls, usually lasting 5 to 10 minutes, happening on average twice a month, for 2 years. Rose had been calling her ex-husband twice a month, and I'd never known about it. I scrolled through the dates, trying to match them to my memories. The call on February 14th had lasted 12 minutes. Valentine's Day. She'd called Stephen on Valentine's Day. Another call on June 23rd, our wedding anniversary. She called her ex-husband on our wedding anniversary. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself as the full scope of Rose's deception became clear. This wasn't about inviting an old friend to a birthday party. This was about a relationship that had never really ended. Connections that had been maintained in secret throughout our entire marriage. I thought about all the times Rose had been running errands for longer than expected. All the times she'd been vague about where she'd been or who she'd seen. All the times she'd checked her phone and smiled in a way that had nothing to do with me. How many of those mysterious errands had actually been meetings with Stephen? How many of those phone calls had she been hiding from me? How many times had she been thinking about him while sitting across from me at dinner, while lying next to me in bed, while celebrating our anniversaries. The worst part wasn't even the deception itself. It was the realization that I'd been living a lie for years, possibly our entire marriage. I'd thought I was Rose's husband, her partner, her choice. But apparently, I'd been her consolation prize, her second best option, her safety net, while she maintained her real emotional connection with the man she'd never stopped loving. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my study, feeling something I'd never experienced before: the complete dissolution of everything I'd believed about my life. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of love and commitment and shared dreams, and I'd apparently been nothing more than a placeholder. The next morning, Rose was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She was on the phone, her back to me, speaking in low, warm tones that made my newly suspicious mind race. "I know, I can hardly believe it either," she was saying. "It feels like we're finally—" "Yes, exactly. Daniel is being very understanding about everything." She turned when she heard my footsteps, and for just a moment I saw guilt flash across her face before she quickly covered it with a bright smile. "I have to go," she said into the phone, "but I'll talk to you soon." She hung up and turned to me with that same artificially cheerful expression she'd worn the day before. "Good morning, honey. Coffee?" "Who was that?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. "Oh, just Margaret from the book club," she said without missing a beat. "She's excited about the party." Margaret from the book club. Rose had never mentioned anyone named Margaret in her book club. In fact, I was fairly certain Rose's book club had disbanded over a year ago. But I just nodded and accepted the coffee she handed me, watching her face carefully. She was lying to me so easily, so naturally, that I wondered how many other lies I'd accepted without question over the years. "Rose," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you and Stephen stayed in touch over the years? I mean, beyond just being polite when you run into each other?" The question hung in the air between us. I watched her face, saw the calculation in her eyes as she decided how to answer. "We've talked occasionally," she said finally. "Nothing significant. Just checking in from time to time." Occasionally. Nothing significant. I thought about the 24 phone calls over the past 2 years, the charity event photos, the social media comments. If this was her definition of occasional and insignificant, I didn't want to know what significant contact would look like. "I see," I said. "And you didn't think to mention this to me?" She shrugged, but I could see tension in her shoulders. "It didn't seem important enough to bring up. You're not the type to be jealous or possessive, Daniel. That's one of the things I've always appreciated about you." One of the things she'd always appreciated about me. My willingness to be lied to and manipulated without complaint. My complete failure to recognize when my wife was emotionally cheating on me with her ex-husband. "You're right," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm not the jealous type." But as I sipped my coffee and watched Rose bustle around the kitchen, humming again with that same contentment she'd shown yesterday, I was already formulating a plan. If Rose wanted to play games, if she wanted to humiliate me by parading her ex-husband in front of our friends and family, then perhaps it was time for her to discover that even the most understanding husband has his limits. I excused myself and went to my study, closing the door behind me. Then I pulled out my phone and began searching for a number I'd found the night before. Margaret Mitchell, Stephen's wife. If Rose thought this party was going to go exactly as she'd planned, she was about to learn just how wrong a person could be. Finding Margaret Mitchell's phone number was easier than I'd expected. She worked as a real estate agent, and her contact information was listed on several professional websites. As I stared at the number on my phone screen, my finger hovering over the call button, I wondered if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life, or finally do something right. It was Thursday afternoon when I finally worked up the courage to dial. Rose was at her weekly hair appointment, which gave me about 2 hours of privacy. The phone rang 3 times before a warm, professional voice answered. "Margaret Mitchell speaking." "Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Daniel Henderson. I believe you're married to Stephen Mitchell." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was more cautious. "Yes, I am. Is there something I can help you with?" I took a deep breath. This is going to sound strange, but I think we need to talk about Stephen and my wife Rose. The silence that followed was long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Then I heard her exhale slowly. "I was wondering when this call would come," she said quietly. "How much do you know?" Her response hit me like a physical blow. She'd been expecting this call. She already knew something was wrong. "I know that Stephen has been invited to my wife's 60th birthday party this Saturday. I know they've been in regular contact for years without my knowledge, and I suspect there's more I don't know." "There is," Margaret said, her voice steady but tired. "Would you like to meet somewhere to talk? I think we both deserve to know what we're dealing with." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop across town, somewhere neither Rose nor Stephen would be likely to see us. As I drove there, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Part of me hoped Margaret would tell me I was overreacting, that Stephen and Rose were just old friends catching up occasionally. But the larger part of me, the part that had been growing suspicious over the past few days, knew I was about to confirm my worst fears. Margaret was already seated at a corner table when I arrived. She was an attractive woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair styled in a neat bob. She looked up when I approached, and I saw recognition in her expression, as if she'd been studying my face, trying to match it to some mental image. "Daniel?" she asked, and when I nodded, she gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Thank you for calling. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time." "What?" I sat down, my coffee growing cold as Margaret began to tell me things that made my 15-year marriage feel like an elaborate lie. "Stephen talks about Rose constantly," she said without preamble. "Not in an obvious way, he's too careful for that. But he finds ways to bring her up in conversation, compares me to her, mentions things they used to do together. For the first few years of our marriage, I thought it was normal. People talk about their exes sometimes." She paused to take a sip of her tea, and I could see the pain in her eyes. But it got worse over time. He started being secretive about his phone calls, disappearing for hours without explanation. Last year, I found text messages between them on his phone. Nothing overtly romantic, but intimate in a way that made my stomach hurt. Inside jokes, shared memories, the kind of communication that suggests an ongoing emotional relationship. My chest felt tight. "What kind of messages?" Margaret pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos. I took pictures of some of them before I confronted him. "Here." She handed me the phone, and I read the messages with growing horror. Stephen writing to Rose, "Thinking about that weekend we spent in Napa. You looked so beautiful that morning." Rose responding, "Some things never change. I still think about us sometimes." Stephen, "If things had been different." Rose, "Maybe they still could be." The messages were dated over the past 6 months. While I'd been planning romantic dinners and anniversary trips, my wife had been exchanging intimate messages with her ex-husband, talking about alternative futures where they were still together. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Based on what I've found, at least 3 years, probably longer." Margaret's voice was calm, but I could see her hands trembling slightly around her teacup. Stephen became different after he started reconnecting with Rose. More distant from me, more critical. He started suggesting that maybe our marriage lacked the deep connection he'd had with his first wife. Deep connection? The same phrase Rose had used when she called Stephen important to her. I felt sick. "When he told me about the birthday party invitation," Margaret continued, "he was excited in a way I hadn't seen in years. He said Rose had specifically requested his presence, that it was important to her that he be there. He talked about it like it was some kind of romantic reunion." I set down my coffee cup with more force than intended. She told me I should understand, because mature love means accepting meaningful relationships. Margaret let out a bitter laugh. "Meaningful relationships? Is that what we're calling emotional affairs now?" We sat in silence for a moment, two people discovering that our marriages had been built on foundations of sand. Then Margaret leaned forward, her expression becoming more determined. "Daniel, I have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" "Stephen thinks he's going to this party to rekindle something with Rose. He's been buying new clothes, talking about how this could be a new beginning for them." He even asked me to work late on Saturday so he could stay at the party as long as he wanted without me waiting up. The audacity of it took my breath away. Stephen was using his current wife's understanding nature to facilitate his reunion with his ex-wife, just like Rose was using mine. "What are you suggesting?" Margaret's smile was cold and determined. "I'm suggesting that Stephen and Rose aren't the only ones who can make plans without consulting their spouses. What if I happened to show up at this party? What if I brought a birthday gift for Rose and wanted to meet all of Stephen's old friends?" The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Rose and Stephen were planning their romantic reunion in front of my friends and family, expecting me to smile and play the understanding husband while my wife humiliated me publicly. But they weren't expecting Margaret. "They'll be furious," I said. "Good, let them be furious. Let them explain to a room full of people why they're so upset about Stephen's wife attending a friendly birthday party." I thought about it for a moment, imagining Rose's face when Margaret walked in, imagining Stephen's panic when he realized his current wife knew exactly what was happening. The thought filled me with a grim satisfaction. What if this backfires? What if they just brazen it out? Margaret pulled out her phone again and scrolled through more screenshots. Then I show everyone these messages and these photos from their lunch dates that Stephen thought I didn't know about, and the hotel receipt I found in his jacket pocket from last month. A hotel 20 minutes from your house, booked for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon when he told me he was visiting his mother. My vision blurred for a moment. A hotel. They'd been meeting at a hotel. While I'd been at work thinking my wife was home reading or gardening, she'd been in a hotel room with Stephen. "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly, seeing my expression. "I know this is horrible to hear." "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I needed to know. We both needed to know." We spent the next hour planning. Margaret would arrive at the party around 7:30, after Stephen had already settled in and gotten comfortable. She'd bring a gift and act completely innocent, as if she'd simply wanted to meet Rose and celebrate with Stephen's old friends. If Rose and Stephen tried to ask her to leave, she'd act confused and hurt, making them look cruel and suspicious in front of everyone. As we prepared to leave, Margaret touched my arm gently. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What are you going to do afterward?" "I mean, after Saturday night." I had been asking myself the same question. "I don't know yet, but I know I can't continue living this lie." She nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. Stephen made his choice a long time ago. He just never had the courage to be honest about it." As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days, a sense of purpose. For years, I'd been the accommodating husband, the understanding partner, the man who never rocked the boat. But Rose had taken advantage of my good nature for the last time. When I walked into the house, Rose was in the living room arranging flowers, humming the same tune she'd been humming since Tuesday. She looked up and smiled at me, and for the first time, I could see the performance in it. The way she was playing the role of the loving wife while planning her reunion with another man. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, just like she had every day for 15 years. "Enlightening," I said, and something in my tone made her look at me more closely. "Is everything all right?" I smiled back at her, matching her performance with one of my own. "Everything's perfect, Rose. I can't wait for Saturday night." And for the first time since Tuesday morning, that wasn't a lie. I really couldn't wait for Saturday night. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable warmth for October. Rose had been in preparation mode since early morning, transforming our backyard into what looked like a scene from a romantic movie. Twinkling lights stretched between the oak trees, tables covered in white linens dotted the patio, and everywhere there were flowers, roses, naturally, in every shade from pale pink to deep crimson. I helped with the setup, playing the role of the devoted husband while my stomach churned with anticipation and dread. Rose was practically glowing, moving through the preparations with an energy I hadn't seen in years. She'd had her hair done professionally, bought a new dress, a flowing blue number that she said brought out her eyes, and was wearing the perfume she'd worn on our first date. She was getting ready for Stephen, not for her birthday party. Every choice, Every detail, every moment of preparation was about presenting herself to the man she'd never stopped loving. "You look beautiful," I told her, as she checked her reflection in the hallway mirror one final time. She turned and smiled at me, and for just a moment I saw genuine warmth in her expression. "Thank you, Daniel. You've been so wonderful about all of this. I know it hasn't been easy." If she only knew how easy it was about to become. The first guests arrived at 6 o'clock. Rose's sister Patricia and her husband Tom, our neighbors the Johnsons, Rose's cousin Linda with her new boyfriend. Normal people leading normal lives, completely unaware that they were about to witness the implosion of a 15-year marriage. Rose flitted between guests, playing the perfect hostess, but I could see her checking the driveway every few minutes. She was waiting for Stephen, and her anticipation was palpable. He arrived at 6:45, just as I was refilling the wine glasses. I watched from the kitchen window as Stephen parked his silver BMW and took a moment to check his appearance in the rearview mirror. He'd dressed carefully, khakis, navy blazer, the kind of outfit that suggested effort without trying too hard. In his hands was a bouquet of white roses, the same flowers Rose had carried at their wedding 23 years ago. According to the photo albums I'd found myself looking through after Margaret's revelations. Rose saw him before he reached the backyard, and I watched her face transform. The polite hostess smile became something radiant, genuine, alive in a way I rarely saw anymore. She practically floated toward him, her blue dress catching the evening light. "Stephen," she said, and his name sounded different in her mouth than mine ever had. Softer, more important. "Happy birthday, beautiful," he replied, and the familiarity in his voice made my hands clench around the wine bottle I was holding. They embraced, and it wasn't the polite hug of ex-spouses who'd remained friendly. It was the embrace of two people who'd been waiting to touch each other again. Stephen's hands lingered on Rose's waist, and she leaned into him in a way that made several guests glance at each other uncomfortably. I walked outside with a fresh bottle of wine, playing my part perfectly. "Stephen, good to see you again." We shook hands, and I saw something in his eyes, not guilt, but satisfaction. He thought he was winning. He thought he was taking something that belonged to me, and he was enjoying every moment of it. "Daniel, thank you for having me. Rose looks incredible, doesn't she?" The comment was calculated, designed to establish his right to comment on my wife's appearance, to mark his territory in front of our guests. A year ago it would have made me uncomfortable. Tonight, it just made me check my watch. 7:25. Margaret would be here soon. Rose took Stephen's arm and led him around the party, introducing him to people he didn't know and reintroducing him to people he did. "This is Stephen," she said to each group, and there was something in her voice that made it clear he wasn't just any guest. "Stephen and I have known each other for many years. Many years. Not Stephen is my ex-husband, or Stephen and I used to be married, but just we've known each other for many years," as if their relationship was some beautiful, mysterious connection that transcended normal categories. I watched our friends and family process this information. Patricia shot me a confused look when Rose practically ignored me while hanging on Stephen's every word. Tom raised his eyebrows when Stephen made a joke about knowing all of Rose's secrets, and she laughed like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. The Johnsons exchanged glances when Rose and Stephen started reminiscing about places they'd traveled together, adventures that had nothing to do with the life Rose had built with me. By 7:20, it was obvious to everyone at the party that something strange was happening. Rose was behaving like a woman with two husbands, giving most of her attention to the one who didn't live with her. Stephen was acting like he belonged there, like he had some claim on Rose that superseded mine. And I was playing the role of the understanding husband, smiling and nodding, while my wife emotionally cheated on me in front of 20 people. That's when Margaret arrived. I saw her car pull into the driveway, and my heart started pounding. She'd dressed carefully, too, a simple black dress, pearl earrings, the kind of understated elegance that made a statement without trying too hard. In her hands was a wrapped gift and a bottle of wine. Rose was in the middle of telling a story about something she and Stephen had done during their marriage when Margaret appeared at the backyard gate. Stephen had his back to the house, so he didn't see her immediately. But Rose did. The color drained from Rose's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her story died mid-sentence, and she stared at Margaret with the expression of someone who'd just seen a ghost. "I'm sorry," Margaret said in her warm, professional voice. "I hope I'm not intruding. I'm Margaret Mitchell, Stephen's wife. I brought a gift for the birthday girl." The silence that followed was deafening. Every conversation stopped. Every guest turned to look at this unexpected arrival. And Stephen, hearing his wife's voice, spun around with panic written across his face. "Margaret," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "What are you doing here?" She smiled at him with perfect innocence. "I wanted to meet Rose and wish her a happy birthday. You've told me so much about her over the years, and when you said how important this party was to you, I thought it would be nice to come along and celebrate." The brilliance of Margaret's approach was immediately apparent. She wasn't accusing anyone of anything. She wasn't making a scene. She was simply being a thoughtful wife who wanted to support her husband's friendships. Anyone who objected to her presence would look suspicious and cruel. Rose was the first to recover, forcing her hostess' smile back into place. "Of course, Margaret. How thoughtful of you to come." But her voice was strained, and I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. This wasn't how her reunion with Stephen was supposed to go. Margaret's presence had instantly changed the dynamic, reminding everyone, including Stephen, that he had a wife, a current wife, who was standing right there. Stephen looked like he wanted to disappear. The confident, territory-marking man who'd been basking in Rose's attention suddenly looked uncomfortable and guilty. "Margaret, you didn't need to come. I told you I'd be late tonight." I know," Margaret said brightly, "but I finished my work early and thought, why not? Rose, you look absolutely lovely." Stephen wasn't exaggerating when he said how beautiful you are. The comment was perfectly calibrated, friendly and complimentary on the surface, but with an undercurrent that suggested Margaret knew exactly how often Stephen talked about Rose and exactly what he said about her. Rose accepted the gift with trembling hands, and I could see her struggling to maintain her composure. This wasn't the romantic reunion she'd planned. Instead of an intimate gathering where she could reclaim her lost love, she now had to play hostess to the current wife of the man she was trying to seduce. "Thank you so much," Rose managed. "Would you like some wine?" "That would be lovely," Margaret said, settling into a chair at one of the tables as if she belonged there. "Stephen, aren't you going to introduce me to everyone?" And just like that, the power dynamic shifted completely. Stephen, who'd been holding court as the honored guest, the mysterious, important figure from Rose's past, was suddenly reduced to a married man at a party with his wife. Margaret's presence reminded everyone that whatever history he and Rose shared, it was history. He belonged to someone else now. I watched Rose struggle through the next hour, trying to salvage something from the evening she'd planned so carefully. She couldn't ignore Margaret without looking rude, but every moment she spent being polite to Stephen's wife was a moment stolen from her reunion fantasy. Stephen, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into himself as the evening progressed, clearly uncomfortable with having both women there. The other guests began to relax as Margaret's presence normalized the situation. With Stephen's wife there, his attendance became less strange, less threatening to the natural order of things. He was just a married couple at a party, nothing more. By 8:30, Rose looked exhausted from the effort of pretending everything was fine. Stephen kept checking his watch and glancing at Margaret, as if hoping she'd suggest they leave. And Margaret continued to be perfectly pleasant, completely oblivious to any undercurrents, asking Rose about her garden and complimenting the decorations. That's when Rose made her critical mistake. Frustrated by how the evening was unfolding, desperate to reclaim some connection with Stephen, she suggested that everyone gather around for a toast. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, glass raised, her voice slightly too loud. "Especially those who've been important to me for so many years." Her eyes locked on Stephen as she said it, and the meaning was unmistakable. Margaret's smile never wavered, but I saw her grip tighten on her wine glass. Some relationships, Rose continued, transcend time and circumstance. Some connections are too deep to be broken by things like divorce or distance. The guests shifted uncomfortably. This was no longer a birthday toast. It was a declaration. Rose was publicly claiming Stephen in front of his wife, in front of everyone. That's when Margaret stood up, her own glass raised, her smile bright and sharp as a blade. "How lovely," she said in her clear, carrying voice. "I'd like to propose a toast, too." Margaret stood there with her wine glass raised, and I could feel the tension in the air shift from uncomfortable to electric. Every guest was watching, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Rose's face had gone pale, and Stephen looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. "I'd like to toast my husband, Stephen," Margaret said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent backyard. "A man who's taught me so much about the importance of honesty in marriage." The word honesty hung in the air like a challenge. Rose's hand trembled slightly around her wineglass, and I saw Stephen shoot a warning look at his wife. But Margaret wasn't finished. "Stephen has always been very open with me about his past relationships," she continued, her smile never wavering. "In fact, he talks about Rose quite often. Sometimes I feel like I know her almost as well as he does." The guests exchanged glances, clearly sensing undercurrents they didn't understand. Patricia, Rose's sister, was frowning slightly, trying to piece together what was happening. The Johnsons looked ready to make a polite excuse and leave. "Margaret," Stephen said quietly, "perhaps we should—" "Oh, I'm not finished, darling," Margaret interrupted, her tone still light and friendly. "I want everyone to know how much Rose has meant to our marriage. After all, she's been such a constant presence in our lives." Rose set down her wineglass with shaking hands. "Margaret, I think there might be some misunderstanding." "Is there?" Margaret asked, tilting her head with apparent curiosity. "Because I found it so interesting when Stephen told me about this party. He was more excited than I'd seen him in years. He even bought new clothes specifically for tonight." Stephen's face was flushing red now. "Margaret, please stop." "Stop what, honey? I'm just sharing how wonderful it is that you've maintained such a close friendship with Rose, like those lunch dates you've been having, and the phone calls, and that lovely afternoon you spent at the Riverside Inn last month." The Riverside Inn. Margaret said it casually, but I saw the recognition flash across Rose's face. She knew exactly what Margaret was talking about. "I don't know what you're implying," Rose said, but her voice was weak, unconvincing. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "Oh, I'm not implying anything, I'm stating facts. Would you like to see the text messages Stephen and Rose have been exchanging? They're quite romantic." The backyard fell into complete silence. Even the evening breeze seemed to have stopped. Stephen looked like he was going to be sick, and Rose was staring at Margaret's phone with the expression of someone watching their entire world collapse. "Some of my favorites," Margaret continued conversationally, scrolling through her phone, "include Stephen writing, 'I dream about what could have been,' and Rose responding, 'Maybe it's not too late.' There's also this sweet one where Stephen says, 'You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever known,' and Rose replies, 'I've never stopped loving you.'" The gasps from the guests were audible now. Patricia's mouth had fallen open, and she was staring at her sister with shock and disgust. Tom was looking at me with sympathy, clearly understanding for the first time what had been happening right under my nose. "Margaret, you have no right," Rose started, but Margaret cut her off. "No right? I'm his wife. I've every right to know when my husband is having an emotional affair, just like Daniel has every right to know when his wife is planning to leave him for her ex-husband." The words hit Rose like physical blows. She took a step backward, her face crumpling. "That's not—" "We weren't—" "Weren't what?" Margaret asked. "Weren't meeting secretly, weren't exchanging love letters, weren't planning this party as some kind of romantic reunion." She looked around at the decorations, the flowers, the twinkling lights. "This isn't a birthday party, is it, Rose? This is a stage set for you to reclaim your first husband." Stephen finally found his voice. "Margaret, you're making a scene. This isn't the place, isn't it?" Margaret turned to him, and for the first time her composure cracked slightly. "Because it seems like the perfect place to me. You've been lying to me for years, Stephen, using our marriage as a cover while you pursued your ex-wife. Did you think I was too stupid to notice? Too trusting to investigate? I never meant for it to go this far, Stephen said desperately. We were just talking. Just talking? Margaret's laugh was bitter. Is that what you call the 3-hour hotel visits? The secret credit card you've been using to pay for your lunch dates? The lies you've been telling me about working late when you were really with her? Rose was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Her carefully applied makeup ruining. You don't understand. Stephen and I have a connection that goes deeper than... Then what? I spoke for the first time since Margaret had arrived, my voice calm and steady. Deeper than marriage vows? Deeper than honesty? Deeper than respect for the people who love you? Rose turned to me, and I saw desperation in her eyes. Daniel, you said you understood. You said mature love means accepting meaningful relationships. I said a lot of things, Rose. Just like you've been saying a lot of things. The difference is, I was trying to be a good husband. You were just trying to cover your tracks. The party guests were beginning to gather their things, clearly uncomfortable with being witnesses to such a private catastrophe. Patricia approached me, touching my arm gently. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I had no idea, she whispered. Neither did I replied. But I'm glad we all know now. Stephen was trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Rose, maybe we should talk privately. No, Margaret said firmly. No more private talks. No more secret meetings. No more lies. She turned to the remaining guests. I apologize for disrupting your evening, but I think it's important that everyone understand what's been happening here. She pulled out her phone again and began reading from the screen. Here's a text from Rose to Stephen from last Tuesday. I can't wait for Saturday night. Finally, we can stop pretending and be together the way we were meant to be. Rose let out a sound that was half sob, half moan. Please stop. And here's Stephen's response. I've been waiting for this moment for years. Daniel will understand eventually. He's too weak to fight for you anyway. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't let it show on my face. Too weak to fight for her. They'd been counting on my weakness, my understanding nature, my unwillingness to make scenes or demand explanations. Well, I said quietly, I suppose they were wrong about that. Margaret looked at me with something like admiration. Yes, they were. Stephen was backing toward the gate now, clearly wanting to escape. Margaret, we should go home and discuss this privately. Should we? The way you and Rose have been discussing your relationship privately for the past 3 years? Margaret's voice was rising now, her professional composure finally cracking. The way you've been making a fool of me while planning your grand reunion? It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Rose said desperately. We were going to handle everything properly. We were going to tell you both after the party. Tell us what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Rose looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. That we belong together, that we made a mistake divorcing, that some loves are too strong to deny. The romantic cliches sounded pathetic in the aftermath of Margaret's revelations. Rose had reduced our 15-year marriage to an obstacle in her true love story. As if I were just a placeholder, keeping her seat warm, until Stephen was ready to reclaim her. And what about our marriages? Margaret asked. What about the people who trusted you, who built lives with you, who believed in your vows? Stephen and Rose looked at each other, and I saw the truth in their expressions. They hadn't cared about our marriages. We were collateral damage in their grand romance, acceptable casualties in their quest to recapture their lost love. You're right, Rose said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. We should have been honest from the beginning. Yes, I said, you should have. But you weren't, and now everyone knows exactly who you really are. The last of the guests were leaving now, offering quiet apologies and sympathetic looks. The beautiful party Rose had planned, the romantic reunion she'd orchestrated, had become a public humiliation that would be talked about for years. Margaret gathered her purse and looked at Stephen with cold finality. Don't come home tonight. Don't come home until you decide whether you want to be married to me or live in a fantasy with someone who's spent 15 years lying to another man. He turned to me. Daniel, I'm sorry this happened at your home, but I'm not sorry it happened. Neither am I replied. Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth. As Margaret walked away, Stephen followed her desperately. Margaret, wait. We can work this out. But she didn't stop, didn't turn around, didn't give him the dramatic reconciliation scene he was probably hoping for. She simply got in her car and drove away, leaving Stephen standing in my driveway looking lost and foolish. Rose and I were alone in the backyard now, surrounded by the remnants of her failed party. The twinkling lights that had seemed so romantic a few hours ago now looked cheap and tawdry. The white roses Stephen had brought were scattered on the ground, trampled by fleeing guests. "Daniel," Rose said, and her voice was small, broken. "I can fix this. We can work through this." I looked at my wife of 15 years, this woman I'd loved and trusted and built a life with, and felt nothing but sadness. Not anger anymore, not hurt, just a deep, abiding sadness for what we'd lost and what we'd never really had. "No, Rose," I said quietly. "We can't." The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, exactly 6 weeks after Rose's birthday party. I signed them at my kitchen table while drinking coffee from the mug Rose had given me for our 10th anniversary, the one that said, "World's Best Husband," in faded blue letters. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rose had moved out 3 days after the party, taking only her clothes and personal items. She'd tried several times to start conversations about working things out or getting counseling, but I'd quietly refused each attempt. There was nothing left to work out. The marriage had been alive for years, and I had no interest in building a new relationship on the ruins of her deception. She'd gone to stay with her sister Patricia initially, but that arrangement had lasted less than a week. Patricia had called me, furious and disgusted with her sister's behavior. "I can't have her here, Daniel," Patricia had said. "She keeps talking about Stephen like he's some kind of romantic hero instead of a married man who betrayed his wife. She doesn't understand what she's done wrong." Rose had ended up renting a small apartment across town. Stephen, as far as I knew, was sleeping on his brother's couch while Margaret filed her own divorce papers. Their grand reunion had lasted exactly as long as it took for the truth to come out, which was to say, not long at all. I'd heard through mutual friends that Stephen had tried to reconcile with Margaret, begging her to give him another chance. But Margaret was made of stronger stuff than either Stephen or Rose had anticipated. She'd told him that if he wanted Rose so badly, he was welcome to have her, but he couldn't have both of them. Faced with the choice between his comfortable marriage to a woman who'd supported him for 8 years and his fantasy romance with an ex-wife who'd helped him destroy 2 marriages, Stephen had apparently chosen neither. He'd moved to another state, leaving both women to deal with the aftermath of his selfishness. Rose had tried calling me after Stephen left, crying and apologetic, saying she'd made a terrible mistake, but I'd stopped answering her calls after the 3rd one. Her mistake hadn't been choosing Stephen over me. Her mistake had been lying to me for years, treating our marriage as a convenient fiction while she pursued her real emotional life elsewhere. The house felt different without her, not empty, liberated. I'd started cooking again, something I'd enjoyed before Rose had taken over all the domestic responsibilities. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my marriage. I'd even started taking photography classes on Saturday mornings, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when my weekends were devoted to Rose's social calendar. Margaret and I had stayed in touch, bonding over the strange experience of discovering our marriages had been elaborate lies. She'd been remarkably resilient, throwing herself into her real estate career and planning a trip to Europe she'd always wanted to take. We'd had coffee a few times, not as potential romantic partners, but as friends who'd survived the same shipwreck. "I keep thinking I should be more devastated," she'd told me during one of our conversations. 8 years of marriage, and I'm not even that sad it's over. "Maybe that tells us something about what those marriages really were," I'd replied. She'd nodded thoughtfully. Stephen was never really present anyway. He was always thinking about Rose, comparing me to her, wishing I was someone else. In a way, Margaret's betrayal freed me from trying to be enough for someone who didn't want me in the first place. I'd understood exactly what she meant. Rose had never been fully committed to our marriage either. She'd been going through the motions, playing house, while her heart remained with Stephen. The only difference was that I'd been too trusting to see it. On a cold December evening, Almost 3 months after the party, I was surprised to find Rose standing on my front porch when I came home from work. She looked thin and tired, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. The confident, radiant woman who'd prepared for her birthday party was gone, replaced by someone who looked defeated and lost. "Hello, Daniel," she said quietly. "Could we talk?" Against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat in the living room where we'd once watched television together, planned vacations, discussed our days. Now it felt like a museum of a life that had never really existed. "Stephen's gone," she said without preamble. "He moved to Arizona last week. He said he needed a fresh start." I nodded but didn't respond. Stephen's departure wasn't my concern. "I've been thinking a lot about us," she continued, "about what we had before everything went wrong." "Before everything went wrong?" I asked quietly. "Rose, things didn't go wrong. This is who you always were. I just finally saw it." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not fair. I loved you, Daniel. I still love you." "No," I said, my voice calm and certain. "You loved the security I provided. You loved having someone who asked no questions and made no demands. But you never loved me the way you loved Stephen." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. "I made a mistake. I got caught up in nostalgia, in the fantasy of recapturing something from my past. But Stephen and we don't work together. We never really did. That's why we divorced in the first place. And now you want to come back to your backup plan." The harshness of my words made her sob harder. "It wasn't like that. You weren't a backup plan." "Then what was I, Rose? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I was the safe choice, while you maintained your real emotional relationship with someone else." She was quiet for a long moment, wiping her eyes with a tissue I'd handed her. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know how to be alone." And there it was, the truth beneath all the romantic rhetoric about deep connections and transcendent love. Rose didn't know how to be alone, and she'd used me to avoid facing that fear. Stephen had represented excitement and passion, while I'd represented security and comfort. She'd tried to have both, and ended up with neither. "You'll learn," I said gently. "It's not as frightening as you think. Daniel, please, can't we try again? Can't we go to counseling, work through this?" I looked at her sitting on my couch, desperate and pleading, and felt nothing but pity. Not anger, not hurt, not love, just a deep sadness for a woman who'd never learned to be honest with herself or anyone else. "No, Rose, we can't." "Why not? People forgive affairs all the time. People work through betrayals." "Because I don't want to," I said simply. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if you're telling me the truth. I don't want to wake up every day knowing that I'm your consolation prize. I don't want to build a relationship on the foundation of your deception." She stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "But we were happy. We had 15 good years. You had 15 years of getting what you wanted without consequence. I had 15 years of being lied to. Those aren't the same thing." Rose left that evening without another word, and I never saw her again. I heard from Patricia that she'd eventually moved to Florida to be near her elderly mother, taking a job as a receptionist at a dental office. Stephen, according to mutual acquaintances, had married a woman 20 years younger than himself within 6 months of moving to Arizona. As spring arrived, I realized I was happier than I'd been in years. My photography was improving, and I'd even sold a few pieces to local galleries. I'd started dating a kind, honest woman named Carol, who worked at the library. She knew my story. Everyone in town knew my story after Rose's birthday party, but she didn't see me as damaged goods or a man to be pitied. She saw me as someone who'd survived something difficult and come out stronger. "You're different from other men I've dated," she told me one evening as we walked through the botanical gardens, photographing spring flowers. "How so?" "You're present. You're really here, really listening. It's like you've learned to appreciate what's real instead of chasing fantasies." She was right. Rose's betrayal had taught me to value honesty over excitement, presence over passion, reality over romance. I'd learned that a quiet, genuine connection was worth more than all the dramatic declarations of transcendent love in the world. On what would have been Rose's 61st birthday, I found myself thinking about that disastrous party exactly 1 year ago. The twinkling lights, the scattered roses, the shocked faces of our friends as the truth finally came out. Margaret had been right. She wasn't sorry it had happened, and neither was I. Rose had given me an unintentional gift that night. By revealing her true nature so completely, so publicly, she'd freed me from any lingering obligation to fix our marriage or forgive her betrayal. She'd made the choice for me, and in doing so, had given me permission to choose myself. I thought about calling Margaret to wish her well. I knew she was back from her European trip and had started dating a colleague from her real estate office. But then I decided against it. We'd both moved on, built new lives from the ashes of our old ones. Some connections, unlike what Rose had claimed about her relationship with Stephen, really were meant to be left in the past. Instead, I called Carol and asked if she wanted to have dinner. Simple, honest, present tense. It was enough. It was everything.